I didn't really want to do this. Every fibre of my body was trying to convince me that anything would be easier than this. Maybe I could talk about Zelda some more, I don't think I've done enough of that yet. What we're dealing with here are some of the most memorable games of all time, but for the absolute worst possible reason. For every game that's got reviewers throwing awards at it, there's at least a couple of games at the opposite end of the spectrum. That is a ratio. I do maths now. This means that there's a lot of games to choose from for this video, like a lot of games, like more games than you could possibly imagine. So I'm going to have to lay down some sort of rules here. Well, for a start, I'm going to limit the number of sports games and movie tie-ins I put in here. Often these types of games are simply made for the cash money and through exploiting the popularity of something that has very little to do with the game. Also, I'm not going to be filling this list with every bad old video game to ever exist, because you've got to have a little leniency for the early era of video games. Only a select number of people knew what they were doing. But other than that, I'm going to need this. You can just tell that we're starting this list off strong when Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is what we begin this list with. A game that single-handedly destroyed the reputation of one of gaming's greatest icons that took 4 years and 5 games to rebuild. I'm tempted to say that we're starting off strong, but, you know, not really. After Sonic Team stopped bathing in the money made by the Sonic Adventure series, they turned their attention to the next generation of consoles and making a brand new, cutting-edge Sonic game for the modern era of gaming. But, through a series of internal problems at Sonic Team resulting in split between developing this game and Sonic and the Secret Rings for the Wii, in tandem with having to hurry the game out in time for the 15th anniversary of the Sonic series, what we got was a severely rushed game littered with very poor design choices and glitches farther than the eye can see. That's not to say that this game didn't have potential. There's still the occasional redeeming feature like the soundtrack, but as a game, there's some serious problems. Like the opening scene for a start, which looks more like something out of Final Fantasy than a quirky little Sonic title. Surely someone would notice that this wasn't really in the spirit of a Sonic game, but the developers had much bigger issues. Sonic 06 is the butt of so many jokes because of its glitches. Some games have little blemishes that add a bit of character, but in some ways, the glitches in Sonic 06 are one of the only reasons why you might play it. It's amazing just how many different ways you can break this game, often in ways that you rarely see in video games. So there's a positive, I guess.
You know, I am wondering if this countdown is going to be easier if I talk about the positive aspects of each game. Maybe I'll find something to talk about, but then again...
As soon as people discover that they can make money off of video games, there's been those people, those special people who've tried to make as much as they can from doing as little as possible. In recent times, examples have been made from franchises that churn out similar games year after year. The aspect that somewhat saves these companies is that these games are actually pretty good, so copy and pasting them isn't such a bad idea. And then there's little old conspiracy entertainment. There's always that one person who takes it a little bit too far, and Conspiracy Entertainment couldn't have given themselves a better name. Around about 2005, these guys published a series of games for the PS2 entitled, you ready for this? Ninja Bread Man, Anubis II, Mythmakers Trixie in Toyland, and Rock'n'Roll Adventure. Oh, I'm sorry, Rock'n'Roll Adventure? Why did I even buy this game? So, what links these 4 games together? Oh, you know, nothing much, except for absolutely everything!
I mean, I guess that's a good thing, because it means I can just talk about one generally and cover all 4 games. Because, you know, the last thing I want to do is cover them all in great depth, just in case I uncover some sort of secret to inner truth in there. I have my doubts.
These games are the meaning of the generically shit platformer. Uninspired landscapes, terrible physics engine, a horrendous camera, sickeningly cliched music, and to top it all off, no story of any sort. You finish each game's levels and yep, that's it. No credits, no damsel in distress to save, not even a message saying, well done for completing our boring as fuck game, be sure to buy the next in a long line of games that are exactly the same. But what could be worse than releasing 4 horrific and virtually identical games on the PS2? Oh, you know, re-releasing them 2 years later for the Wii. Like, what the actual fuck? If there was ever a sign that the developers cared more about lining their pockets, it's taking 4 terrible games for the PS2, changing nothing, and throwing them at the Wii, looking for some idiotic people within a different audience who might just accidentally buy one of these.
Technically there are worse games on this list, at least these games function as games, but from a commercial standpoint and respecting your consumers, No, just no. Not a chance. I'm gonna need a refill, aren't I?
You'd think that by 2013, companies might have looked at all those famously bad games and observed how not to make games. Despite this, developer Eutechnyx took a break from making such gems like Pimp My Ride and a bunch of NASCAR games to present the world with Ride to Hell Retribution. And almost immediately, we wish they hadn't bothered. There's no excuse for this. People have been making video games for over 40 years, and we've had some shocking games in that time. But the important thing is that most people take notice of these games and learn how not to make games a steaming pile of poop. Clearly Eutechnyx didn't get the memo. Or maybe they did, because there's parts of this game that seem awfully similar to more successful games.
You know what, Dave?
What?
We should totally have a fighting system like in those Batman games.
Is that the one where he flies through all those rings?
No, the one where he's all sneaky and shit.
But shouldn't we add some more enemies to make it look more impressive and fluid?
Nah, Dave, you know time is money, and I'd rather spend the afternoon putting onion rings on my dick.
Did any of you ever play Full Throttle? That awesome biker game with great dialogue and characters with Tim Schafer at the helm? I kinda get the sense that Ride to Hell Retribution is the sort of game you get as a sequel if you try to describe Full Throttle to a mental patient. Oh, and how about this? You spend the first half hour of the game asking women for information, doing small chores for them, and are then rewarded with fully clothed, dry humping sex. Anyone see a problem here? But for all of Ride to Hell's problems, if you can find this game for cheap, like really cheap, like basically giving it away, I really recommend picking it up. Especially if you're a budding developer or interested in game design, it's eye-opening to see just how badly you can make a game with all the tools we have in the 21st century. We've got games fully implementing things like Oculus Rift, and we've got the ugly duckling over here with terrible voiceovers and glitches just all over the place. Except this time, there's no swan. Instead, there's supposed to be 2 more games on the way.
No, I've got nothing. That's a pretty good place to end that bit.
How's this for a premise? An ex-basketball player desperate for some more cash wanders into a fighting dojo in Japan, where he falls into another dimension where he competes in a 2D fighting game. What? That sounds like a terrible idea? That you should just shred the script and work on something else? Anything else? Try telling that to the makers of Shaq Fu. Surely the concept of this game would be enough to tell you how good it's going to be. Surely the fact that there's a website dedicated to destroying all remaining copies and to stopping the release of what is supposed to be a sequel is a pretty good indication that this is one of those historically bad games. Seriously guys, go to shaqfu.com, it's hilarious. You gotta remember that this game came out when Shaquille O'Neal was so popular that he could do whatever the fuck he wanted. Even so, I'm not sure if Shaq walked into Delphine Studios and said that he wanted to be the star of the worst fighting game of all time. Really, that seems like a conversation no one would want to have. The main issue with Shaq Fu is the controls, which turn an otherwise bad fighting game into virtually unplayable. Every input takes a good second or so to register, which means when you start spamming buttons like in most fighting games, at best all your moves will be delayed by a couple of seconds, or at worst, the game will freak out and use almost none of them. Fighting games live and die by their controls, and well, this one hasn't got much of a pulse.
Do you reckon Shaquille O'Neal remembers this game? Is he haunted by the memory of this game with his face plastered all over it? I hope he got a lot of money for that. So what we're doing next is the Zelda CDI games. No! No! It's not happening! Don't it! Fuck it! It's not happening! Never in the world! Fuck it!
Good morning, Internet. I hope you're all keeping well. I'm here today to educate you about the Zelda CDI games, a collection of Zelda games that Nintendo would rather you didn't remember. Back in the early 90s, Nintendo struck a deal with Philips to use their disc technology as long as Philips could use Nintendo's mascots in some of their games. No one found any problem with this, especially since Philips wouldn't be using any of Nintendo's producers in making these games. Rather inevitably, this resulted in a series of poorly made games that leave a considerable scar on otherwise fairly flawless franchises. Most notably, the 3 Zelda games. So why are these games so bad?
Really? You're gonna come on a place like YouTube and ask that question? Well,
these games are the darkest days of the Zelda series. They came a good 3 years after A Link to the Past, and rather than taking the series forward, they didn't... No, not much of that, not really. If we're gonna analyse these games more than we need to, because apparently it's my duty now to talk about them in some sort of depth, both Wand of Gamelon and Faces of Evil use the same side-scrolling perspective that was briefly used in Zelda 2, with Zelda's Adventure opting for more of a top-down angle used in every successful 2D title prior and since. Not quite sure what this is supposed to show really, as they're all as bad as one another, and the problems run deeper than camera perspective. All three of the CDI Zelda games feel very cheaply made without even one glance at what Nintendo did with the formula. But despite all of this, a lot of effort went into one particular area of these games. Not the enemy AI, not the soundtrack. How about the full motion cutscenes? If you're somehow watching this video without any knowledge of the CDI Zelda cutscenes, just spend like a good afternoon looking through them. They're bad, like seriously bad. You can see that a lot of effort was put towards them as, and it pains me to say this, they're easily the best part of these games, but they're just so bad.
No, I'm not going to do a YouTube thing. That'd be the obvious thing to do. Gotta rise above it, guys. Rise above it. Have you ever seen those test maps included in games, those weird maps without any textures? Most games use them in the very early stages of development to trial things like physics engines and gameplay mechanics. They are pretty useful, you know, but you'd never make a game around them, would you? Would you?
Oh, it's Bubsy the Bobcat! Oh my god!
If there was ever a gaming mascot that defined terrible gaming, Bubsy the Bobcat would be a damn good contender. Back when mascots like Mario and Link were starting to gain momentum, Accolade tried to force their terrible platform series down the throat of gamers, and somehow got 3 games out of this. With the rise of 3D platformers spearheaded by Super Mario 64, someone decided that Bubsy should follow suit, and one rushed development later, and we got Bubsy 3D Fur-Bitten Planet. Now we're scraping at the bottom of the barrel. Just take a look at this game. Just take all of this in. Nothing says essence of a platform game than a textureless, featureless backdrop, platforms that are literally grey bricks, and controls that make you feel like you've been spending too much time sucking down the whiskey.
Maybe they got a point.
There's always issues and hurdles to overcome when you transfer a 2D game series to 3D. Mario went through a raft of different iterations and ideas before Nintendo settled on the free-moving camera of Super Mario 64. But when you realise that Bubsy 3D came a good couple of months after Super Mario 64, you start to realise that the developers had very little idea of what they were doing. It's surprising that there's so little going on here. There's just a bunch of teeny tiny atoms to pick up and these weird platforms that serve no real purpose. At least in the previous 2 Bubsy games, they were full of enemies that could one-shot you if you came within inches of them. There's just nothing here. Nothing. I'm guessing that the developers just rushed it to try and cash in on Super Mario 64's success. But here's the thing, it didn't really cash in as people worked out pretty quickly that the game was crap. Despite this, the game's box leads you to believe that somebody actually thought it was good. Some company, called PS Extreme, called it one of the sleeper hits of '96, an experience that no action or platform gamer should miss, and gave it the Gold X Award. Then you spend 5 minutes on Google to see that neither PS Extreme or the Gold X Award ever existed. That's right, literally no one would say anything nice about this game, so Accolade made up some bullshit to try and convince you that it was an experience you couldn't miss. And if you like a game where your biggest threat is trying to walk in a straight line, they might be onto something. Combining something as fun as bowling with something as wholesome as Christmas must be a recipe for a game that fills you with warmth, a game that calms the mind, a game that heals your soul. No matter what ails you, I'm sure it's not something that Elf Bowling can't fix. But that's just in theory. You know when I said that with Shaq Fu, the premise itself is probably going to be enough of a sign to show you how good or bad the game is? Well, the original Elf Bowling is a funky little PC game where you partake in the age-old pastime of throwing a bowling ball at some elves. And that's absolutely fine, I've got no issue with this version, especially since it was a browser game that you might spend 5 minutes on during a lunch break. To find something worthy of being on this list, we've got to delve deeper and into the dark depths of remakes. Okay, so how about this? Someone had the bright idea of taking this free online game, combining it with a sequel, which was also free, and releasing it on the Game Boy Advance and DS for money. Let's look at the many reasons why this is an atrocious decision, because trust me, it is. We'll ignore the games themselves for now, but let's look what they sold the game for. This collection of 2 games, both of which were free to play on the internet, is now available for you for £12 or about $20. That amount of money for this? Who thought that that would be a good idea? But whatever, Elf Bowling 1 and 2 isn't helped by the fact that these aren't exactly what you call true ports of the PC originals. Take those graphics in, just spend a couple of seconds staring intently at what this game has to offer. Does anyone remember how great games like Metroid Fusion and Golden Sun looked on the GBA? I know the GBA is a little old now, but developers were still capable of using it to create some great looking environments. Elf Bowling doesn't really try to do anything like that. Also, why is Elf Bowling 2 a shuffleboard game?
I like to think of myself as a man of reason. The decisions I take are calculated. They're executed with precision, with thought, with careful consideration of what could happen. But real quick, how did Elf Bowling get 8 games and a movie? It's a fucking bowling game with elves! That's like building a franchise, like a tennis game with horses, or a golf game with hippos. How does that even work? Who gave these people money to spend? Number 3 is Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. I don't even... Do I even have to talk about this one? Do I genuinely have to tell you about this one? Is it my role to do this for you now?
Yeah, this is gonna hurt. Through a little bit of extra coverage, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties has become a byword for terrible video games. That is, if you consider this to be a video game, it's certainly on the border between video game and interactive movie experience. Whether that's a good thing or not is up to you. But a little history. Plumbers Don't Wear Ties is one of the standout titles, admittedly, not for all the right reasons, for the 3DO, a console that promised high quality interactive movies tied in with video games. And it worked. Occasionally. It was very hit or miss overall, and with Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, it was the biggest miss they ever could have had. Again, I feel like I've got to go back to the whole is this actually a video game thing. It follows the 3DO's tagline of interactive storytelling, but the story in question isn't exactly a Hollywood blockbuster.
Imagine if you and your friends decided to make a film, but instead of using a video camera, you used the crappiest camera you could find. And instead of like taking movies, you took a whole load of crappy pictures and added voiceover to it. Would you try and make that into a game?
Needless to say, there's a few problems here. Doesn't help that there's a guy with a plunger wearing a tie, abandoning the title within the first couple of minutes. Aside from that, there's plenty of moments that get you questioning how the hell this was green lighted. Like the announcer fight, or maybe the applauding dogs. Or... Okay, that's all we need to see, I'm sure you get the idea, I'm gonna go do something else, go to the next thing, I don't fucking care. You really can't stress the importance of developing a game properly. Anyone who's played Minecraft through alpha and beta will know just how much a game changes when you're still developing it. The main point is that you're supposed to be releasing a game when it's done, once you've ironed out all the glitches, and once the game is in what you might consider to be a finished state. Or, alternatively, big rigs, over-the-road racing. Oh boy, now we're on to the heavyweights. Any mention of big rigs is often followed with a series of loud groans, and not in a good way. It's the bargain basement of video games, one you'd never actually play if you knew what it was. In essence, it's a truck racing game, a great start already, but it's a truck racing game released in its pre-alpha stage, which predictably means there's an awful lot of "Yeah, it's amazing, it's the best game, it's 2000 fucking, it's the best game." To say that Big Rigs has some problems with it is like saying that Joseph Stalin wasn't the nicest guy you could meet. I dare you, no, I double dare you, to find some sort of redeeming quality in this game, because there kinda isn't any. Maybe you'll get some sort of enjoyment about driving up 90-degree inclines or being able to go into some sort of warp drive reverse gear, but none of this is intentional. This game was still developed by people who had brains that kind of functioned. I guess they just ran out of time.
Actually, I take back the whole not wanting to play it. Find it, play it, you might even enjoy it, because I tell you, it's broken like hell, but it's not insufferable, and no matter what you've done with your life up to this point, no matter what you want to do with your life, remember the fact, and this is a fact, you're a winner.
So what could be worse than games that are forced through development too quickly, or games that set back entire companies? There couldn't be any other game than one that not only destroyed one of the biggest names in the business, but caused one of the biggest crashes in the history of the video game industry. Ladies and gentlemen, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. You can tell a lot about a game by its ability to feed back information to you. You know who the enemies are, how you can heal yourself, all those little things that make games playable, I guess. Playing just a few minutes of E.T. will change your life, seriously. I've looked at this game from several different angles and I still have no fucking idea what's going on. I know it predates the NES and the birth of franchises like Mario and Metroid, but very little of this makes any sense to me. This little guy has to be E.T. because he looks marginally like the E.T. from the film, and this number at the bottom has to be a sort of timer or something, but apart from that, this... just no, nothing. Guys, I got nothing.
I feel like this is more of an existential experience than anything else on this list. I mean, there's got to be more to this than what it is. There's got to be some sort of higher meaning to it, like a funky artistic film. Or maybe it's just really, really shit.
E.T. was a game that came just a few months after the hugely successful film with the same name, and Atari hyped the shit out of it. It was one of the earliest games to be based on a movie, and it was thought to be the catalyst for future contracts to be made, linking games and movies together. Come release day, and this is what we get, a game that was reportedly coded in just 5 weeks. Imagine if you got a brand new Mario game that had 5 weeks of code in it. The end result wouldn't be anywhere near good enough to warrant 5 million copies of the game being made. But that's what happened.
As a younger gamer, I feel that Atari represents that older period of gaming. They laid foundations before Nintendo were here, before Sega were here. They laid the groundwork. They are, as far as I'm concerned, the father of video gaming. That wasn't until E.T. came along. This thing killed Atari.
E.T. was a huge dud. Atari were left with a ton of unsold copies, and some gamers even sent the game back because, well, you know why. They had so many leftovers that it's reported that they buried them in a landfill in New Mexico shortly after. What followed was the fall of Atari, a company that seemed unstoppable just a few years prior, and the infamous video game crash of 1983, which almost completely destroyed this fledgling industry.
It's funny. E.T. isn't a bad game because it looks unfinished, because it offends people. It's a bad game because it just isn't very good. The Atari had some great games on it by 1982, but E.T. just failed to deliver in every way. Atari themselves bigged it up, but it came down in one hell of a crash. It took down one of the most iconic names in the industry, as well as threatened the industry itself. It was one really destructive game, and if that isn't a sign of a bad game, then... well, I don't know what is. This has been rabbidluigi, and I've got some thinking to do. See you next time, guys.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, I'd be very grateful if you could go ahead and give it a like. It helps me out a lot, like a lot, like loads and loads and loads of lots. Of course, if you want to stalk me and see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, I have my Twitter here and my Facebook there as well. I post stuff to that occasionally. I'm sure they'll come in handy. You can pick and choose, guys.
Take your damn clothes off!